The carnage of the Turkey Shoot in June 1944 was not the end of the Imperial Japanese Navy, Aijin, it was the end of its viability as a conventional fighting force. The variable time, VT, fuse had achieved strategic paralysis, eliminating the Empire's ability to contest the skies over the Pacific. With no air cover, the grand, decisive plan of the Aijin, a final, glorious engagement, was reduced to a desperate, doomed gamble. The ensuing Battle of Leyte Gulf was fought with the full, devastating knowledge that the air shield was gone, and the American fleet was untouchable. The Kamikaze, a tactical confession. The most profound, chilling strategic response to the VT fuse was the official adoption of the Kamikaze, the divine wind of organized suicide attacks. This was not a move of sheer fanaticism alone. It was a cold, hard tactical calculus forced by the failure of conventional technology. When a conventional bomber dropped its payload, the VT fuse ensured that the accompanying anti-aircraft shell would detonate perfectly before the bomb could be released, rendering the mission futile. The American defense had mastered the art of destroying the means of delivery. The only remaining countermeasure was to turn the pilot and the plane into the bomb itself. If the pilot aimed to hit the deck, the aircraft's entire mass and fuel load became the payload. Even if the VT fuse detonated the shell just outside the cockpit, the resulting massive fire, shrapnel, and debris mass would often continue toward the target, negating the fuse's efficiency. The Kamikaze was, therefore, a terrible, desperate confession by the Aijin High Command. Our science has failed, and only the complete sacrifice of our manpower can overcome the enemy's superior technology. Yet, even this ultimate measure of devotion was tragically undermined by the efficiency of the VT fuse doctrine. American gunnery crews, now hardened veterans of instantaneous warfare, quickly adapted their targeting protocols. They learned to track the fast-moving kamikazes, firing continuous volleys of VT shells into the approach vector. The fuse would still detonate early, but because the kamikaze pilot was flying a stable, low-altitude approach, the perfect target for the shell's radar, the frequency of successful interceptions remained high. The American destroyers and cruisers, shielded by their impenetrable dome, formed the perfect, mobile anti-kamikaze barrier. While the attacks inflicted horrific, unforgettable damage, the VT fuse system ensured that the majority of the planes were destroyed before they could achieve their objective. The kamikaze strategy succeeded in inflicting fear and casualties, but ultimately failed to break the integrity of the American fleet defenses, securing the technological victory for the U.S. Navy. The FACC's final, futile efforts. Deep within the Tokyo bunker, Engineer Akizuki and the remnants of the FACC were fully aware of the technological trap they were in. Their goal shifted from creating a countermeasure to salvaging the science itself. Akizuki, now unburdened by Dr. Sato's denial, had all the intellectual freedom he desired, but faced crippling resource limitations. The Type 5 radio fuse, Japan's accurate, but fatally delayed, VT equivalent, remained hopelessly trapped in the prototype phase. Akizuki's team had meticulously reverse-engineered the circuit and the material requirements, but the means of production were simply gone. The enemy's lead is not measured in brilliance, but in industrial scale, Akizuki recorded in his lab journal. We need 18 months to perfect the ceramic substrate and the vacuum tube production. We have, perhaps, 3 months of resources left. The cost of the 2-year delay was now calculated with chilling finality. The opportunity to replicate the subminiature vacuum tubes had vanished with the destruction of key manufacturing plants and the loss of access to crucial rare earth materials. The technological defeat was irreversible because the industrial engine that could have provided the solution was crippled. Leyte Gulf, the technological trap. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval engagement in history, saw the Aijin commit nearly its entire remaining fleet to a complex, multi-pronged attack. The plan was brilliant in its conception: lure the main U.S. fleet away with a sacrificial northern force, allowing the central force to pass through and destroy the vulnerable landing forces. The plan failed, in part, because the Americans knew, with absolute certainty, that the Japanese possessed no significant aerial reconnaissance or strike capability left. The VT fuse had ensured the blindness of the Japanese fleet. The Americans could afford to be flexible and audacious, knowing their carriers were safe from massive air attacks. In the final, desperate actions, particularly those fought by the American escort carriers, the VT Fuse proved its defensive worth one last time. When the Japanese surface fleet finally stumbled upon the lightly defended American carriers, the concentrated fire from the escort destroyers, armed with their VT shells, formed the crucial defensive screen against the final salvos of Japanese air attacks, helping to preserve the core landing forces and seal the overall American victory. The VT Fuse had transformed the surface fleet's air defense from an auxiliary nuisance into a primary, decisive force. The final humiliation and the silent surrender. With the naval and air forces rendered obsolete, the final defense of the empire fell to the ground forces, leading to the devastating campaigns of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. It was here, on the beaches and in the caves, that the VT Fuse delivered its most personal, agonizing humiliation. The technology that had decimated the Air Corps was now adapted to annihilate the infantry. The ghost in the trenches. The VT Fuse, adapted for use in field artillery, fundamentally transformed the nature of warfare for the Japanese soldier. Japanese defensive doctrine relied heavily on deeply dug, connected networks of trenches, bunkers, and foxholes, structures designed for protection against conventional artillery, which required a ground impact to explode. The VT Fuse, detonating the shell perfectly 10 to 30 feet above the target, airburst, reversed this defensive calculus. Instead of providing shelter, the trenches now became meticulously aimed channels for deadly downward projecting shrapnel. A direct hit on the trench line was no longer necessary. A successful VT airburst over the trench's location ensured maximum destruction. Reports filtering back to Tokyo from Iwo Jima and Okinawa spoke of the terror. Soldiers reported that the airbursts seemed to possess a demonic intelligence, hunting them out of their cover. The loss of morale was crushing. The feeling of having no refuge, not even in the sacred soil of the homeland, compounded the psychological defeat. The technological denial that had begun in a sterile Tokyo lab was paid for with the lives of thousands of Japanese soldiers whose bodies were ripped apart by shrapnel they could never anticipate or evade. Meanwhile, Dr. Hiroshi Sato, the chief architect of the denial, endured his own private, harrowing reckoning. Reduced to a non-entity in a dusty administrative office, he obsessively studied captured American technical reports. His focus was particularly drawn to the operational history of the VT Fuse outside the Pacific, specifically its devastating effect on German positions during the Battle of the Bulge in Europe. Sato realized the deeper tragedy. The Allies had been so sure the Japanese were technologically blind that they had risked deploying the fuse in Europe only after ensuring the Germans had absolutely no chance of recovering an intact dud. The Japanese system had been so thoroughly dismissed by the Allies that they were deemed the safer repository for the secret. This was not just a military failure. It was a profound, global scientific humiliation. Sato's stubbornness had been a strategic gift to the Allied war machine. His final penance was the knowledge that his intellectual failure was not merely local but had cost the empire its entire defensive capacity. The war was lost not on the factory floor, but in the academic rigidity that refused to accept a new truth. The culmination of the technological defeat led to the inevitable conclusion. As the American forces closed in, and the new terror of the atomic bomb, a technology that represented another massive, insurmountable leap in physics, was deployed, the decision for surrender became a matter of minimizing further destruction. The proximity fuse, in its own way, had laid the necessary groundwork for the surrender. It had methodically dismantled the Japanese military's ability to resist, negating their air force and rendering their ground defenses ineffective. It had eliminated the possibility of a successful, desperate last stand, paving the way for the Emperor's final haunting broadcast. The war ended, not with a clash of fleets, but with the silent realization that the ultimate weapon had been operational for 2 years, a scientific truth that had been too difficult to accept. The legacy of the spark, approximate 2,000 words. The Emperor's surrender broadcast in August 1945 marked the end of the war, but the story of the variable time, VT, fuse was only beginning. The technology that had dictated the terms of the Pacific conflict would become the unacknowledged foundation of the post-war world, ushering in the age of advanced electronics and the subsequent technological boom. The scientific exchange. In the immediate aftermath of the surrender, the FACC bunker became a crucial site of interaction between the defeated Japanese engineers and the triumphant American technical teams. This encounter was one of professional respect mixed with cold, hard strategic analysis. Engineer Akizuki, exhausted but vindicated, finally met the American naval engineers who had designed the very weapon that had defeated his nation. He was shown a complete, functional VT fuse, a miniature marvel of ceramic and wiring, gleaming and pristine. The Americans were stunned by Akizuki's technical grasp, confirming that the Japanese had correctly deduced the complex principles of subminiature vacuum tubes, the quartz oscillator, and the G-force solution, but had simply lacked the audacity and the industrial capacity to mass-produce it. The American delegation, in turn, explained the scale of the commitment. The VT Fuse project involved thousands of scientists, engineers, and workers across dozens of dedicated labs, costing billions of dollars, a mobilization of intellectual and industrial power that dwarfed anything the resource-strained Japanese system could muster. The defeat was not personal, it was systemic. This exchange solidified the final, bitter lesson for Akizuki. The war had been won by a nation capable of believing in the impossible and mobilizing its entire scientific infrastructure to achieve it. The architects of the future. Dr. Hiroshi Sato, unable to face the professional wreckage of his career and the monumental failure of his dogma, faded into complete obscurity. His name became a cautionary tale in the nascent Japanese science establishment, a ghost of intellectual arrogance that served as a silent warning against dismissing radical scientific possibilities. Kenjiro Akizuki, however, became a reluctant architect of Japan's future. The meticulous, desperate work undertaken in the FACC bunker, the deep dives into miniaturization, ceramics, and advanced electronics, provided a critical, hard-won foundation for post-war industrial recovery. The knowledge gained in the frantic attempt to replicate the VT fuse directly informed the rapid development of Japan's electronics industry. The advancements in ruggedized subminiature components, initially meant for artillery shells, were soon adapted for use in portable radios, early transistors, and consumer electronics, leading to the economic miracle of the 1950s and 60s. The war was lost by the VT fuse, but Japan's technological resurgence was ironically built upon the principles it learned in defeat. The enduring legacy. The variable time fuse did not retire with the end of World War II. Its influence was vast and immediate. Radar and electronics. The VT fuse's miniaturization technologies laid the groundwork for the development of small, ruggedized circuitry. The subminiature vacuum tubes were a necessary stepping stone to the invention and rapid deployment of the transistor, and subsequently, the solid-state electronics that power modern life. The Cold War. The technological arms race of the Cold War, the relentless push for smaller, faster, and smarter weapons systems, was defined by the precedents set by the VT fuse. It taught the world that technological surprise could be the single most decisive factor in global conflict.